The crumpled $20 bill landed in the puddle at my feet. "Take a taxi. I don't want my car to smell," my mother said as the locks clicked shut. My surgical incision burned. 12 minutes earlier, I had sent the message that would cut off the life they had built on my money. The moment they drove away, something in me went cold for good. My name is Abigail Hathaway. I am 34 years old, and I have just learned that the most excruciating part of an emergency abdominal surgery is not the moment the anesthesia wears off. It is the absolute, razor-sharp clarity that strikes you when you are forced to stand on a damp sidewalk and realize your entire life has been a transaction. Standing outside the automatic sliding glass doors of the street. Brigid Medical Pavilion in Charleston. My body felt completely hollowed out. The humid evening air clung to my pale skin, heavy and suffocating. Every single breath I drew sent a jagged, burning spike of agony radiating from the fresh incision hidden beneath the thick gauze taped to my stomach. I was weak. My legs trembled under the weight of my own depleted frame, and the harsh fluorescent lights from the hospital lobby cast long, sickly shadows across the concrete. The discharge nurse had offered to wheel me all the way down to the curb, but I had politely declined her offer, insisting with a tight smile that my family was waiting for me outside, and they were. Right there, idling perfectly in the circular patient pickup driveway, was the pearl-white luxury SUV. The engine purred with a silent, expensive hum that I knew intimately because I was the one who paid the exorbitant monthly lease for exactly 1 second. A pathetic, childish spark of hope flared inside my battered chest. I thought that maybe the sheer terror of my sudden collapse, the frantic ambulance ride, and the emergency surgical intervention had shocked my parents back into possessing a basic human conscience. I truly believed, just for a fleeting heartbeat, that they had come to take their daughter home, to help her into bed, to finally be a mother and a father. I shuffled forward, wrapping my arms tightly around my midsection to keep my core from tearing apart. I reached a trembling hand toward the sleek chrome door handle of the back seat, before my fingertips could even graze the metal. The heavy internal locks clicked down with a loud, definitive thud. I froze in my tracks. Slowly, the tinted passenger window hummed downward, stopping abruptly after revealing a gap no larger than 2 inches. Through that narrow slit, the perfectly manicured fingers of my mother, Celeste Hathaway, emerged. She did not lean over to look at my pale, exhausted face. She did not ask about the surgery. She did not ask if I was in pain. Instead, she pushed a crumpled, slightly damp $20 bill through the crack. The green paper fluttered down through the humid air, landing directly in a dirty puddle of condensation right next to the toe of my hospital-issued slip-resistant socks. "Take a taxi," my mother said. Her voice was perfectly crisp, beautifully modulated, and completely devoid of any emotion. "I do not want my car to smell." I shifted my gaze past the narrow gap in the window, looking straight through the front windshield. My father, Randall Hathaway, was sitting comfortably in the driver's seat. He was wearing his favorite driving gloves, his hands resting lightly on the heated leather steering wheel. He kept his eyes locked dead ahead on the empty driveway. He did not turn his head to acknowledge my existence. He did not step out to help his child who had just left a post-operative recovery room. He did not flinch. He simply waited for his wife to finish dismissing the daughter they found so incredibly inconvenient. The tinted window glided smoothly back up, sealing them inside their climate-controlled, custom-scented sanctuary. I stood paralyzed on the curb as the bright red brake lights flashed, illuminating the wet asphalt. The heavy vehicle pulled away flawlessly, merging into the evening traffic and leaving me behind in the exhaust fumes. I looked down at the crumpled $20 bill resting in the murky puddle. To pick it up meant I had to bend over. Bending over meant actively tearing at the freshly sutured muscle tissue in my abdomen. But I did it anyway. I gritted my teeth, closed my eyes, and forced my broken body downward. The agony was blinding. White-hot stars exploded in my vision, and a strangled, guttural gasp clawed its way out of my throat, tasting like copper and bile. My cold fingers finally closed around the soggy, worthless piece of paper. As I slowly straightened back up, panting, sweating, and fighting off a violent wave of nausea, something miraculous shifted inside of me. I did not cry. I did not shed a single tear. For 34 years, I had desperately craved their approval, wept over their endless slights, and quite literally bought their affection with every ounce of energy I had. But standing alone on that curb, clutching the miserable $20 they felt my survival was worth, the desperate, loving daughter inside me simply stopped breathing. She died right there on the concrete, discarded like medical waste. What immediately replaced her was a cold, terrifying, an absolute stillness. I did not call out to them. I did not beg. I did not bang my fists against the fleeing car. I calmly reached into my small plastic belongings bag, pulled out my mobile phone, and opened my messages. I found the secured thread with my lead attorney, Elias Wren. My thumbs moved steadily over the screen. I typed a single word: begin. I pressed send and watched the tiny notification confirm the message was delivered. A battered yellow city cab pulled up to the curb a few minutes later. I opened the heavy door myself, carefully maneuvering my aching body onto the cracked vinyl back seat. The car smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap pine air freshener, a stark contrast to the pristine leather environment my parents were currently enjoying. I gave the driver the address of my secret downtown condominium, a secure property I had purchased 2 years ago under a blind trust. It was a silent sanctuary my parents did not even know existed, a place untainted by their endless demands. I leaned forward and handed the driver the wet, crumpled $20 bill. "Keep the change," I told him quietly, leaning my heavy head against the cool glass of the window. As the cab rattled over the uneven cobblestone streets of the historic Charleston district, I let my mind wander through the sickeningly long ledger of my life with Randall and Celeste Hathaway. I remembered every single month of feeding their bottomless pit of a lifestyle. I remembered the country club initiation fees I quietly covered, so my father could play golf and drink scotch with men who had actually earned their wealth. I remembered the extravagant charity gala tables my mother demanded I sponsor, so she could pose in designer gowns and pretend she was a generational philanthropist. I remembered the endless home renovations, the imported wine deliveries, the luxury vacations to the coast of France, the personal housekeepers, and the constant, draining flow of money that I transferred to maintain their grand illusion. I had hauled them up from middle-class obscurity and crowned them coastal royalty. I had spent 80 hours a week building a corporate empire from nothing, sacrificing my youth, my sleep, and eventually my health, all while mistakenly equating their financial demands with a need for family security. I had grown up in a house where love was strictly conditional, where sacrifice was constantly demanded but never reciprocated. They called it my fundamental duty as a loyal daughter. in my profound naivety. I called it my privilege to take care of them. But it was never care. It was parasitism. I was never their child. I was their host. I was a walking, talking, breathing automated teller machine. And the moment the machine broke down and smelled of antiseptic, they tossed a $20 bill at it and drove away. The dull rhythmic pain in my abdomen pulsed with every bump in the road, serving as a steady reminder of my own mortality. It was a mortality they had found incredibly inconvenient. I closed my eyes and let the steady rumble of the taxi engine soothe my racing thoughts. The grief I should have felt was entirely absent, completely replaced by the quiet, methodical hum of a long overdue demolition. I had planned to dismantle the grand, gleaming castle I had created for them, piece by costly piece, as soon as their car vanished past the hospital gates. I began reclaiming my life. 10 years ago, I founded Red Crest Infrastructure Recovery. If a Category 4 hurricane tears the roof off a luxury resort in Miami, or a massive flash flood destroys the subterranean server farms of a financial district in Atlanta, my company is the one that gets the call. We do not deal in residential drywall or minor insurance claims. We handle massive, high-stakes commercial asset recovery. We bring in fleets of industrial water extractors, emergency power grids, and structural engineering teams to drag multi-million-dollar properties back from the brink of total ruin. It is an incredibly lucrative, high-stress industry built on diesel fumes, shattered glass, and sleepless nights. I built the entire operation from absolute zero, working 80-hour weeks until my hands shook and my vision blurred because of that blood and sweat. Red Crest grew into an enterprise generating 8 figures in annual revenue. And because of that revenue, Randall and Celeste Hathaway were able to seamlessly transform themselves from a completely unremarkable, coupon-clipping couple into the reigning coastal nobility of Charleston. I paid for the sprawling, custom-built waterfront estate in Mount Pleasant, complete with a deep-water dock they never used. I covered the exorbitant monthly leases for their vehicles. I paid the utterly ridiculous 5-figure annual dues for their exclusive, invitation-only country club. I funded the twice-weekly deep cleaning services, the gourmet private catering for their endless dinner parties, and the lavish European vacations that my mother plastered all over her social circles to ensure everyone knew just how incredibly blessed she was. My father absolutely loved playing the role of the seasoned gentleman advisor. At every high society oyster roast or yacht club mixer, Randall could be found holding court. He would stand there, swirling a glass of 30-year-old single malt bourbon that I paid for, adjusting the heavy platinum Swiss watch I bought for his 60th birthday, and dispensing profound business advice to men who actually owned companies. He loved to casually mention his investments and his portfolio, expertly omitting the tiny detail that his entire financial existence was completely subsidized by his daughter's corporate accounts. My mother, on the other hand, had meticulously curated the persona of a sophisticated old-money philanthropist. Celeste was always joining another gala committee, always hosting another silent auction, and always offering to underwrite another cultural initiative. She would stand at podiums, dabbing her perfectly powdered nose, accepting crystal teardrop awards for her boundless generosity. Yet, every single charitable contribution, every platinum tier sponsorship, and every wildly expensive floral arrangement she donated was paid for through a family trust that siphoned cash directly from the Red Crest operating margins. I allowed it to happen because I was raised in a household that aggressively weaponized the concept of gratitude. Growing up, every meal provided, every back-to-school outfit purchased, and every basic parental duty fulfilled was presented to me as a monumental, agonizing sacrifice on their part. They cultivated a deep, enduring sense of emotional debt inside my head. In their twisted vocabulary, my one-sided financial hemorrhage was simply called my duty. They had convinced me that this was simply how successful children behaved. For a very long time, I honestly did not realize I had been completely dehumanized, reduced to nothing more than a talking, breathing automated teller machine. The very first person to grab me by the shoulders and force me to look at the ugly truth was Naomi Pierce. Naomi was my closest friend, but more importantly, she was a terrifyingly brilliant forensic auditor. I had hired her firm to conduct a comprehensive internal review of Redcrest to prepare for a potential corporate expansion. We were sitting in my downtown office late one Tuesday evening. The city lights were glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Naomi had spread out dozens of physical financial charts across my mahogany desk. "You have a massive leak, Abigail," Naomi said, tapping a manicured finger against a bright red column on the paper. "And it is not your supply chain. It is not your equipment depreciation. It is your parents. They are bleeding you dry." I had immediately bristled, falling back on years of ingrained defensive conditioning. "They are my family. Naomi. They rely on me. I take care of them." That is just how our dynamic works. Naomi did not flinch. She simply pulled up another document, sliding it across the polished wood. "This is not taking care of someone. This is a targeted extraction. Look at these expense ratios. Last month alone, Celeste routed $25,000 through the Community Outreach Fund to pay for a private chartered flight to a wellness retreat in Sedona. Randall expensed $8,000 in imported cigars and vintage wine under the guise of client entertainment. Abigail, they are treating your life's work like a bottomless slush fund." I stared at the numbers. The stark black ink on the white paper was impossible to argue with. But the heavy chains of familial guilt kept me anchored to my denial. I told Naomi she was overreacting, that I would simply have a polite conversation with them about budgeting, and that things would naturally balance out. But the polite conversation never happened. Instead, the final, undeniable spark that ignited the entire powder keg arrived just 3 weeks later. The Ashbourne Harbor Society Winter Ball was the absolute crown jewel of the Charleston social calendar. It was an event where old money and new power collided, and securing a prime table was a matter of life and death for people like my mother. Celeste had called me on a Thursday afternoon, completely frantic, demanding that I immediately authorize a pledge of $150,000 to secure the Diamond Benefactor status. The timing could not have been worse. Redcrest was currently navigating a severe cash flow bottleneck. A major commercial client, a national hotel conglomerate whose properties we had restored after a catastrophic coastal flood, was 90 days late on a $3 million final payment. My payroll accounts were stretched thin. I had heavy equipment suppliers demanding immediate settlements, and my financial department was working around the clock to prevent a severe liquidity crisis. I drove out to the Mount Pleasant house to explain the situation in person, hoping that a face-to-face conversation would help them understand the gravity of the corporate strain. I sat in their massive, sun-drenched living room, surrounded by imported Italian leather furniture and original oil paintings I had funded, and explained that the company was temporarily vulnerable. I told them the Winter Ball sponsorship was simply impossible this year. You cannot be serious, Celeste snapped, her manicured hands fluttering to her chest in absolute horror. Abigail, I have already told the committee chairs that our family is anchoring the event. If we pull out now, we will look completely destitute. I will be a laughingstock at the club. Mom, I am telling you that my company is waiting on a $3 million receivable that is trapped in legal arbitration. I tried to explain, my voice tight with exhaustion. I have 200 employees who need their paychecks on Friday. I cannot liquidate $150,000 for a party. Randall set down his crystal glass of bourbon, looking at me with a profound mixture of disappointment and irritation. He did not ask how my negotiations were going. He did not offer to help. Business is about leverage. Abigail, my father said, adopting his most patronizing, authoritative tone. You simply move some funds around. Pull from an emergency line of credit. Do whatever you have to do. But you do not embarrass your mother. And you do not tarnish the family name over a temporary cash flow hiccup. We expect you to handle this. They did not see a daughter buckling under the immense, crushing weight of a corporate crisis. They only saw an obstacle standing between them and their social validation. As I sat in that cavernous, expensive room, listening to them prioritize a single night of dancing over the survival of the company that fed them, Naomi's sharp words echoed in my mind. They were not my family. They were a liability. And it was in that exact moment, watching my mother pout over a seating chart, that I finally decided to test just how far their greed would actually go. Naomi sat across from me in my office, sliding a blank legal pad across the polished mahogany desk. We need a stress test, she said, her voice dropping to a clinical, terrifying whisper. You have insulated them from consequence for a decade. The only way to see what they are actually made of is to take away the insulation. Tell them the cash flow has completely frozen. Tell them the corporate accounts are locked. Your personal wells are dry, and you have to move in with them to stop the financial hemorrhaging. It felt incredibly cruel to engineer a manufactured crisis for my own parents. But the fresh memory of my mother agonizing over a gala seating chart instead of my collapsing company had hardened something fundamental inside me. I packed 3 modest suitcases and drove to the Mount Pleasant estate on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. When I walked through the grand double doors and delivered the fabricated news, Randall and Celeste performed flawlessly. The timing was impeccable because our head housekeeper was actively dusting the foyer chandelier just a few feet away. My mother gasped loudly, rushing forward to wrap her arms around my neck in a suffocating embrace. Oh, my poor darling, Celeste cried, her voice carrying perfectly over my shoulder to ensure the housekeeper heard every single syllable of her maternal devotion. We are family. We will get through this dark chapter together. This is your home. My father stood by the sweeping staircase, his face arranged in a mask of solemn, patriarchal concern. He patted my shoulder heavily, a gesture he usually reserved for retiring business associates. For a fleeting fraction of a second, feeling my mother's arms around me and seeing my father's grave expression, a dangerous wave of guilt washed over my conscience. I almost opened my mouth to confess the lie. To tell them the company was entirely fine and the money was secure. I am profoundly grateful I kept my mouth shut. The charade lasted exactly 4 hours. Later that evening, I was walking down the carpeted upstairs hallway to get a glass of water when I heard the low, frantic hiss of voices bleeding out from the slightly ajar door of the master study. I stopped dead in my tracks, holding my breath, pressing my back against the cool plaster of the wall. "We absolutely cannot cancel the winter caterer," my mother hissed, pacing furiously across the Persian rug. "If we downgrade to a buffet style now, the entire committee will know we are financially crippled. We will drop the landscaping service and fire the pool boy. But we are keeping the private chef for the December mixer. I will not be humiliated in front of my friends." "Keep your voice down," my father snapped back. "I am looking at the calendar. We have the yacht club gala in 3 weeks. Did she say if the corporate accounts are frozen before or after the foundation checks clear? If we default on that pledge, my reputation in this town is utterly finished." "She did not say," my mother replied, her tone dripping with pure irritation. "She just stood there looking exhausted. Honestly, Randall, how could she let this happen right at the beginning of the social season? It is incredibly selfish." "I will speak to my broker in the morning," he said coldly, "if she is truly washed up. We need to make sure none of her corporate liabilities are tied to this property. If she goes down alone. We cannot let her failure tarnish our standing." I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs. There was no concern for my mental state. There was no panic about the hundreds of employees who supposedly might lose their jobs. There was absolutely no discussion about how to comfort their daughter who had just lost her life's work. The only thing they cared about was whether the check for the Ashbourne Harbor Society winter ball would bounce, and how quickly they could distance themselves from my perceived failure. The next morning, the subtle punishments began. I had originally carried my bags into the spacious guest suite on the second floor, a room with a beautiful balcony overlooking the water. When I came down for breakfast, my father was waiting in the massive chef's kitchen, casually sipping an espresso. "Abigail," he said, not bothering to look up from his digital tablet. "Your mother and I were talking. Since you might be staying for an extended period, it makes more sense for you to use the small suite above the detached garage. The main house needs to be kept pristine for hosting. We cannot have extra clutter lying around when the committee members drop by." The suite above the garage was a cramped, poorly ventilated room originally designed for live-in staff, a position we had eliminated years ago. It smelled faintly of mildew and old cardboard. I simply nodded, turned around, and hauled my heavy suitcases back down the stairs and out across the wet driveway. When I tried to park my sedan in the 3-car garage to protect it from the coastal rain, my mother quickly rushed out onto the porch, waving her hands frantically. "Oh, sweetie, please move the car to the street," she called out, her voice tight with artificial sweetness. "Your father needs the extra bay space to detail his vintage roadster, and we do not want your car leaking oil on the epoxy floor." My car was less than a year old and did not leak a single drop of anything. But I reversed out of the driveway and parked 2 blocks away on the public street, getting completely soaked in the rain as I walked back. By day 3, the psychological degradation became overtly petty. My mother started turning down the thermostat in my room from the central control panel in the main house, leaving me shivering in the coastal dampness. When I came inside to do a load of laundry, she stood hovering near the washing machine, crossing her arms tightly over her cashmere sweater. "We really need to start being mindful of our utility consumption, Abigail," Celeste lectured, tapping her manicured fingernail against the lid of the washer. "Water and electricity are incredibly expensive in this district. Perhaps you could consolidate your loads or use the laundromat downtown. We all have to tighten our belts during your little crisis. Every single drop of water, every kilowatt of electricity, and the very roof over her head had been paid for by my money. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her standing there, lecturing me about the cost of hot water in a house I owned, was enough to make my blood boil in my veins. They were treating me exactly like an unwanted freeloader who had overstayed her welcome. That afternoon, I sat in my freezing room above the garage, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, and called Naomi. I relayed every single whispered conversation, every cold directive, and every microaggression of the past 72 hours. "The test is over," I told her, my voice hard and flat. "They failed spectacularly. Start pulling the legal paperwork. I want to evict them by Friday." "Hold on," Naomi interrupted, her tone sharp and analytical over the receiver. "Do not pull the plug just yet, Abigail. Think about this rationally." "I am thinking rationally. They are bleeding me dry and treating me like garbage. I have seen enough." "No, you have seen their greed," Naomi corrected. "But greed is lazy. What you just described to me over the phone is not lazy. Relegating you to the staff quarters, restricting your movement, isolating you from the main house, worrying about asset protection. That is active, calculated self-preservation." I frowned, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that people who are simply greedy panic when the money stops," Naomi explained slowly. "Your parents are not panicking. They are plotting. They are acting like people who already have a backup plan. There is something much bigger and much uglier buried under their financials. If you kick them out now, you just get the satisfaction of watching them pack. If you stay and let them think you are completely broken, they will eventually get careless and show you exactly what they are hiding." I looked around the small, damp room, listening to the heavy rain battering against the thin single-pane window. The idea of staying another week in this psychological torture chamber made my stomach turn. But Naomi was right. If I had learned anything from a decade of corporate crisis management, it was that you never detonate a bridge until you know exactly who is standing on the other side. "Fine," I whispered into the phone, staring blankly at the peeling paint on the ceiling. "I will stay." "Good," Naomi said quietly. "Keep your head down. Play the victim, and let them think they are in total control." I hung up the phone and lay back on the narrow, uncomfortable mattress. I was no longer just the cash machine. I was the enemy inside the gates, and I was going to find out exactly how deep their betrayal went. My daily existence inside the sprawling waterfront estate morphed into a highly calibrated, suffocating psychological endurance test. Every room in the house became a heavily monitored zone where my parents exercised their newly perceived dominance. My mother had the smart home technician install a digital lock code on the central climate control system, strictly maintaining the ambient temperature at a stifling 80 degrees during the day. She claimed we had to be incredibly aggressive about slicing our utility footprint, forcing me to sweat through my clothes while she comfortably lounged on the shaded, breezy veranda, the petty humiliations compounded with every sunrise. On a humid Thursday morning, my father walked into the kitchen and aggressively slapped a wrinkled gas station receipt onto the marble island. He sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. "Taking you to the downtown pharmacy yesterday drained a quarter of a tank," he grumbled. pouring himself a cup of imported dark roast coffee. Fuel is completely outrageous right now. Having an extra dependent in the house really shifts our overhead in a negative direction. You need to start walking to the corner store if you need personal items. I stared at the glossy marble countertop, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. The sheer, unadulterated irony of his complaint was entirely paralyzing. I bought the luxury vehicle he was driving. I paid the exorbitant monthly insurance premiums. The very credit card he used at the gas pump was drawn from a corporate account I personally funded. Yet, there he stood, weaponizing a $70 refuel against me as if I were a teenage burden draining his hard-earned retirement savings. By the second week of my fabricated bankruptcy, I was entirely stripped of my status as a daughter and silently demoted to the role of unpaid domestic labor. My mother was hosting her annual Spring Awakening charity brunch, an exclusive mid-morning gathering for 50 of the wealthiest socialites in the coastal district. Instead of hiring her usual event coordination team, she handed me a heavily highlighted clipboard and told me to make myself useful. For 3 exhausting days, I hauled massive, waterlogged floral centerpieces from the delivery vans to the dining room. I ironed 50 linen napkins by hand because the dry cleaner was deemed an unnecessary expense. I stood in the sweltering driveway, arguing with aggressive catering vendors over delivery timelines while a dull, persistent ache began to throb deep in my abdomen. I swallowed a handful of over-the-counter painkillers, blaming the sharp twinges on the sheer stress and physical exertion, completely unaware of the medical time bomb ticking inside my own body. On the morning of the brunch, just as the first convoy of black luxury sedans began pulling through our wrought iron gates, my mother quickly intercepted me in the main hallway. I was wearing a simple tailored navy dress, ready to help seat the guests. "Oh, no, sweetie," she whispered urgently, her perfectly glossed lips pulling into a tight, condescending smile. She physically turned me by my shoulders, pointing me toward the back hallway. "You look completely exhausted, and your dress is horribly wrinkled. Run along to the back office and organize my charity files. We simply cannot have the board members seeing you in this depleted state. It would raise too many uncomfortable questions about your financial situation. And I will not have my morning ruined by gossip." I was banished, hidden away like a shameful family secret in the very house I owned. I retreated to the dim, mahogany-paneled home office, locking the heavy oak door behind me. The dull pain in my stomach flared again, sharp and localized, but my anger burned far hotter. Since I was officially ordered to organize her files, I decided to do exactly that. I bypassed the neatly labeled folders on her desk and started digging through the heavy, locked filing cabinet in the corner, easily picking the cheap brass lock with a heavy paper clip. Tucked entirely out of sight, wedged behind a stack of glossy architectural magazines, I found a thick oxblood leather folio. I opened it and spread the documents across the desk. What I found was infinitely dirtier than simple ingratitude. Inside the folio were the actual, itemized receipts for the community outreach line items I had been blindly approving for the past 2 years. A corporate charge for $5,000, vaguely labeled in our ledger as a Women in Crisis Housing Initiative, was neatly stapled to a glaringly detailed invoice from a premier medical spa in Palm Beach. It covered a full week of rejuvenating peptide therapies and hot stone massages. Another receipt, logged as a $3,000 grant for a youth arts program, perfectly matched an authentication certificate for a limited edition designer handbag sitting in my mother's closet. I laid the documents out flat, taking high-resolution photographs of every single page, and immediately sent the encrypted files to Naomi. Naomi called me back exactly 48 hours later, her voice entirely devoid of its usual warmth. "I tracked the routing numbers from the vendor payouts," she stated flatly over the secure line. "Every single dollar funnels into a limited liability corporation called Magnolia Civic Relations. It is a complete ghost entity, a shell company registered to a post office box 2 towns over. The registered agent who set it up is your mother's bridge partner. They are systematically embezzling from your company under the guise of community public relations." My blood ran entirely cold. They were not just reckless spenders, they were actively defrauding my corporate infrastructure. The horrifying revelations did not stop there. The very next afternoon, while my parents were out attending a yacht club luncheon, I slipped back into the office to search my father's desk. I bumped his computer mouse, waking his desktop monitor from sleep mode. He had carelessly left his primary email window open. Right there on the glowing screen was a finalized digital contract for a massive, high-risk commercial bridge loan tied to a speculative real estate venture I had never heard of. At the very bottom of the document, neatly stamped in the authorization box, was my secure digital signature. It was an older version of my signature file, one I had used 3 years ago before updating my security protocols. But it was legally binding. He was not just bleeding my accounts dry, he was actively wearing my financial identity like a mask, binding me to catastrophic debts to fund his private investments. I stumbled backward, the dull ache in my abdomen suddenly flaring into a white-hot stab of agony that took my breath away. I braced my hands on the edge of his desk, fighting through the wave of intense nausea. That evening, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle snapped into place. I was walking softly down the back staircase to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The French doors leading to the rear terrace were slightly ajar, letting the warm evening breeze drift inside. My parents were sitting outside, illuminated by the soft glow of the patio heaters, casually drinking a bottle of my imported red wine. Honestly, if her company actually goes under, it might be a blessing in disguise. My father chuckled smoothly, the ice clinking softly in his crystal glass. "Exactly my thought," my mother agreed, her voice sickeningly sweet and light. "She is so emotionally fragile right now. She has always been desperate for our approval. If she loses everything, she will be completely dependent on us again. We can finally mold her properly." "A clean sweep," my father murmured in agreement. "Once she officially declares bankruptcy, we bring in my attorney. We convince her that she is not in the right state of mind to handle her remaining assets. We have her sign over the family trust and grant us full power of attorney for her own protection. It will be completely seamless." I stood frozen in the dark kitchen, the shadows swallowing me whole. My heart hammered a frantic, violent rhythm against my ribs. I finally understood the terrifying reality of my situation. This was no longer just a story about entitled parents throwing a tantrum over a canceled gala. This was a calculated, predatory trap. They did not just want my money, they wanted total, unadulterated control. They were waiting in the wings for me to break, fully prepared to swoop in like vultures to strip the remaining meat from my bones. It was a hostile corporate takeover meticulously wrapped in the warm, suffocating language of family love. For 5 relentless days, a dull, localized ache had been clawing deeply into my lower abdomen. I desperately tried to ignore it, swallowing handfuls of over-the-counter pain medication and blaming the crushing, physical stress of my fabricated financial ruin. But by the morning of the Ashbourne Harbor Society's elite preliminary mixer, the persistent ache had sharpened into a hot, piercing blade that took my breath away. Despite my ghostly pale complexion and the cold sweat constantly beading on my forehead, my mother showed absolutely no mercy. The event coordinators are entirely short-staffed. Celeste had announced over breakfast, already perfectly dressed in her tailored silk pantsuit. Since you are not currently going into your office, I need you at the venue by noon. It is your fundamental duty to help me ensure the floral arrangements and the acoustic setup are utterly flawless. I will not have my reputation tarnished by a lazy event planner. I was far too weak to argue. I drove my vehicle to the historic downtown ballroom, my vision swimming and blurring with every minor bump in the road. For 6 agonizing hours, I dragged my failing body across the polished hardwood floors of the venue. I directed the frantic florists, repositioned heavy velvet chairs, and placated the endless, entirely unreasonable demands of Charleston's wealthiest socialites. Every single step I took sent a shockwave of fiery agony radiating through my torso. I gripped the edges of the linen-draped tables just to remain upright, pasting a dead, hollow smile on my face while my mother glided through the room, loudly accepting praise for the beautiful decor I had meticulously arranged with my own trembling hands. The breaking point arrived at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. I was standing in the dimly lit catering hallway, trying to verify a sudden change in the champagne service with the waitstaff, when Naomi walked through the heavy swinging doors. She had attended the mixer as a guest, specifically to keep a watchful eye on me, knowing full well the psychological warfare my parents were waging. She took one look at my chalk-white face and immediately dropped her expensive evening clutch onto the floor. "Abigail, you look like a ghost," Naomi said, rushing toward me with her hands outstretched. I opened my mouth to tell her I just needed a cold glass of water, but the words never materialized. A sudden catastrophic rupture of pain tore through my insides, an explosion so violent and absolute that the entire world instantly tilted on its axis. My knees buckled beneath me. The sterile white walls of the service corridor rushed up to meet my face, and the very last thing I heard before slipping into the dark abyss was the chaotic shattering of wine glasses and Naomi screaming for someone to call an ambulance. I drifted in and out of a blindingly bright, terrifying reality. I distinctly remember the deafening wail of the ambulance sirens tearing through the humid night air. I remember the frantic, shouting voices of the paramedics as they loaded me onto a stretcher, their hands pressing firmly against my swollen stomach, sending fresh waves of blackness over my vision. At the emergency bay, the attending surgeon did not mince words. It was a severe acute internal inflammation, rapidly approaching a full rupture, if they did not wheel me into the operating room within the hour. The toxic complications would be completely fatal. As the trauma nurses prepped my arm for the intravenous line, the sliding glass doors of my hospital bay parted. Randall and Celeste swept into the small room, still fully dressed in their immaculate evening wear. They did not rush to my bedside. They did not take my trembling hand. My mother immediately began brushing invisible lint off her designer gown with a look of sheer disgust, while my father aggressively checked the gold watch I'd purchased for his birthday. "This is incredibly inconvenient timing," my father muttered to my mother, completely ignoring the fact that I was lying on the gurney, hooked up to a shrieking heart monitor. The committee chair was just about to make the opening remarks. We had to sprint out the back exit like common criminals. A harried surgical resident stepped into the room, tightly gripping a plastic clipboard. He looked at my parents, his expression tense with professional urgency. "Mr. and Mrs. Hathaway, your daughter is in critical condition. We need to perform emergency surgery immediately to prevent a systemic infection. I need you to sign these consent forms as her emergency contacts, and the waiting room is just down the hall. We will come find you the moment she is safely in recovery." My father snatched the clipboard, scrawling his signature with annoyed, aggressive strokes. He shoved it back toward the doctor and let out a long, heavy sigh. "How long is this procedure going to take?" he demanded, his tone dripping with profound irritation. "A few hours, sir," the resident replied, clearly taken aback by the sheer lack of parental concern. "You can wait in the family lounge." Randall turned to Celeste, shaking his head firmly. "I cannot sit here all night smelling like antiseptic and bleach," he stated flatly. "I have an early tea time tomorrow morning, and you need your beauty rest. She is in the hands of the professionals now. There is absolutely no reason for us to ruin our entire night sitting in a cheap plastic chair." My mother nodded in eager agreement, adjusting her heavy diamond earrings. "You are entirely right, darling. The hospital environment is just so terribly depressing." She finally looked down at me, her eyes completely devoid of warmth or maternal fear. "Be brave, sweetie. Call us tomorrow when you're feeling a bit more presentable." And just like that, they turned around and walked out of the emergency department. They did not even wait to see the surgical orderlies push my gurney through the double doors toward the operating room. They chose their pristine clothes, their social calendar, and their own absolute comfort over the literal life and death of their only child. As the heavy doors swung shut behind them, the anesthesia finally took hold, pulling me under. But the cold, paralyzing truth had already frozen my heart solid. I woke up hours later in the dim, quiet stillness of the post-operative recovery ward. The rhythmic beeping of the vital monitor was the only sound in the sterile room. I slowly turned my heavy head toward the corner. There was a single, vinyl visitor's chair pushed against the wall. It was completely empty. I painfully reached for my mobile phone resting on the plastic tray table. The screen was entirely dark. There were no missed calls. There were no frantic text messages checking to see if I had survived the night. Nothing. The test was officially over. The conclusion was violently, undeniably absolute. I shed absolutely no tears, because the loving family I thought I was desperately trying to save had never actually existed in the first place. The next morning, the heavy wooden door to my room pushed open, and Naomi walked in. She was carrying a small canvas duffel bag filled with clean clothes and holding a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. She had already been to the hospital's front desk, using her own credit card to cover the immediate out-of-pocket administrative expenses my parents had entirely neglected to handle. She pulled the vinyl chair right up to the edge of my bed, her eyes dark and incredibly serious. "I paid your deductible, and I brought your comfortable sweatpants," Naomi said softly, gently resting her hand on my thin hospital blanket. Then, she leaned in much closer, her voice dropping to a sharp, tactical whisper. "And I finished the secondary financial audit while you were in surgery. It is so much worse than we initially thought. Abigail, they are not just siphoning cash for designer clothes and luxury spa days. Your father has been actively forging legal documents to leverage your remaining corporate assets against high-yield private loans. The financial exposure is catastrophic." I stared up at the acoustic tiles on the hospital ceiling, feeling the fresh, tight pull of my surgical sutures with every shallow breath. The physical pain in my stomach was absolutely nothing compared to the cold. Undeniable fury now circulating through my veins. The taxi rolled through downtown Charleston as pain pulsed through my abdomen with every turn. But the test was over. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elias Wren. Elias was my lead corporate litigator, a man who charged $800 an hour because he was precise, relentless, and never wasted a move. He answered on the second ring.
Abigail, Elias said, his voice a low, steady rumble over the connection. I got your text.
Tell me what you need done. Everything. Elias, I replied, my voice shockingly steady despite the intense physical pain radiating through my core. I want the absolute financial lockdown protocol activated immediately, as of this exact second. Randall and Celeste Hathaway no longer have a daughter. They only have liabilities. Understood, Elias said, and I could hear the rapid clicking of his mechanical keyboard in the background. Give me the specific parameters. Cancel the 2 platinum supplementary credit cards attached to my primary corporate account, I instructed. Watching the historic pastel houses of the Battery blur past the taxi window. Freeze the joint family checking account. Contact the wealth management firm and immediately suspend all recurring monthly dividend transfers from Glassmere Holdings. They do not get another dime of my liquid capital. The accounts will be frozen within 15 minutes, Elias confirmed smoothly. What about the physical assets and the vendor contracts? Burn them down, I said, a cold, dark wave of satisfaction washing over me. Revoke the comprehensive auto insurance policy on the pearl white luxury vehicle. If Randall drives it off the estate, he drives it entirely uninsured. Terminate the bi-weekly maid service contracts. Cancel the landscaping retainers, the pool maintenance, and the private chef we booked for the winter social season. Call the country club board of directors and inform them that the Hathaway Family Trust will no longer be underwriting their annual membership dues. Let them figure out how to pay their own bar tab. Consider it done, Elias replied. Are you prepared for the immediate fallout the moment those cards decline? They are going to attempt to contact you. They will likely threaten legal action regarding the Mount Pleasant property. Let them try, I countered. The estate is held in the blind trust, and my name is the only one on the master deed. They are legally nothing more than guests who have drastically overstayed their welcome. Block their numbers from reaching my primary line. Any communication they wish to have from this moment forward goes directly through your firm. Do not give an inch, Elias. I never do, he assured me, the faint hint of a predatory smile echoing in his tone. Rest up, Abigail. I'll handle the rest. I ended the call, feeling the heavy, suffocating chains of my familial obligations shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The retaliation was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a devastating legal reality. By 3 o'clock this afternoon, the luxurious, carefully curated world my parents inhabited would abruptly stop spinning. Before I could tuck the phone away, I dialed one more number. Naomi picked up immediately, the chaotic background noise of her accounting firm filtering through the speaker. Tell me you are safely out of that hospital, Naomi demanded urgently. I am in a cab, heading to the downtown property. I confirmed, wrapping my free arm tightly around my waist to support my throbbing abdomen. Elias is freezing every account and payment stream that connects them to my money. They're cut off. Naomi let out a sharp sigh of relief. Thank God. I have the entire forensic portfolio completely compiled and ready for the authorities. The Magnolia Civic Relations embezzlement trail is bulletproof. The forged digital signatures on the commercial bridge loan are categorized and notarized. I can have the fraud division of the police department knocking on their massive oak door by tomorrow morning. No, I said firmly, staring hard at the back of the driver's headrest. Hold the heavy artillery, Naomi. Abigail, what are you talking about? She argued, her tone instantly spiking with frustration. They committed felony fraud. They tried to steal your company and bury you in debt while you were bleeding internally. We have everything we need right here. I know we do, I replied, my voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous register, and we will use it. But if we drop the criminal forgery charges on them right now, they will immediately hire defense attorneys. They will spin a beautiful, tragic narrative to their high society friends about a misunderstanding over family business. They will play the innocent victims of a ruthless corporate daughter. I refuse to give them that stage. So what is the strategy? Naomi asked, her professional curiosity finally overriding her anger. I want them to suffocate on their own lifestyle first, I explained, the vision of their impending humiliation crystallizing in my mind. I want them to walk into their favorite luxury boutiques and have their cards declined in front of the cashiers. I want them to panic when the maid does not show up. I want them to look around that massive, empty house and realize the oxygen has been completely cut off. When entitled people lose their money, they get sloppy, they doubt each other, they thrash around and expose their true nature to everyone watching. Keep the fraud evidence locked in your safe. We wait until they are desperate, and then we let them destroy themselves. Naomi was silent for a long moment before letting out a low, appreciative whistle. You are absolutely terrifying when you are focused. Abigail, I will lock the files down. Call me the second you are inside the condo. The taxi finally pulled up to the discreet, unmarked entrance of my secure downtown building. I paid the fare, tipped the driver generously with a fresh bill from my wallet, and slowly maneuvered my battered body out of the vehicle. The building concierge, a quiet and fiercely loyal man, immediately rushed out to assist me, carefully guiding me through the private lobby and into the secure elevator. 10 minutes later, I was standing inside the silent, sunlit sanctuary of my secret home. There were no imported Italian marble statues here, no massive crystal chandeliers bought to impress committee members. It was just clean lines, warm wood, and absolute safety. I shuffled across the wide plank oak floors and collapsed onto the deep, emerald green velvet sofa in the center of the living room. The physical toll of the journey immediately crashed over me. My abdominal muscles screamed in protest, a hot, searing reminder of the flesh they had so casually discarded. I lay flat on my back, a knitted throw blanket pulled up to my chest, and stared directly up at the smooth, white expanse of the ceiling. The silence in the apartment was deafening. But for the very first time in my entire adult life, it did not feel lonely. My body was broken, bruised, and heavily medicated. But as I watched the afternoon shadows stretch across the walls, my vision was perfectly clear. I did not feel the crushing weight of their expectations anymore. I did not feel the desperate, pathetic need to buy their love. I lay there breathing through the pain, fully awake for the first time in years, when my tablet began chiming on the coffee table beside me. Elias had set up a live financial ledger, routing every single automated denial directly to my private screen. It was like sitting in a theater, watching a live broadcast of a slow-motion shipwreck. The destruction of their perfectly curated universe was meticulously documented in bright red digital ink. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the first notification flashed across the screen. It was a declined transaction for $4,500 at a premier King Street spirits merchant. I could perfectly picture the scene unfolding. Randall was undoubtedly standing in the cedar-lined VIP tasting room, wearing his Italian loafers, trying to purchase 2 cases of imported single-malt scotch to impress his golf buddies. I imagined the polite but firm beep of the credit card terminal flashing red. I knew he would scoff, blame a banking error, and hand the clerk my secondary platinum card. When that one declined as well, the clerk, a man who usually bowed to my father as if he were royalty, would look at him with a lethal mixture of pity and suspicion. Only 20 minutes later, a second alert appeared. Celeste was attempting to process a $12,000 charge at an elite coastal floral design studio. She was trying to secure the massive, cascading winter orchids for her gala table, when the terminal rejected her payment. My mother did exactly what I knew she would do. According to the audio recording, Naomi later pulled from the florist's security system. Celeste puffed up her chest and tried to use the sheer weight of her social standing to bully the vendor. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Celeste demanded, her voice echoing off the glass vases. "I am Celeste Hathaway. We have patronized this establishment for 10 years. You will process this order immediately and simply send the invoice to my estate manager. Our family reputation is a guarantee." The shop owner, a shrewd businesswoman who catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy, did not flinch. She simply looked at my mother and replied that the Hathaway account had always been strictly prepaid by a corporate entity, without a valid card on file. No flowers would leave the shop in that agonizingly public moment, surrounded by other whispering socialites browsing for centerpieces. My mother discovered a terrifying truth. Her pristine, old money reputation did not actually exist. Her entire social prestige was nothing more than a hollow illusion propped up entirely by my money. At 3 o'clock, my personal mobile phone rang. It was an unknown landline number, meaning they had borrowed a telephone to bypass the legal block Elias had placed on their cellular devices. I took a slow, deep breath, ignoring the sharp pull in my surgical incision, and answered the call. "Abigail, you need to call your ridiculous bank immediately." My father barked through the speaker, his voice a frantic mixture of commanding authority and rising panic. "Your mother and I are experiencing some sort of technical glitch with the accounts. It is incredibly embarrassing. Fix this immediately." I stared at the white ceiling of my apartment, my voice dropping to the cold, detached cadence of a corporate risk management officer. "There is no technical glitch," I replied evenly. "The accounts are closed. Your cards are shut off. The money stops here. I suggest you start cutting your expenses immediately." "Restructure our overhead," Celeste shrieked in the background, snatching the phone from my father. "Abigail, what is wrong with you? We are your parents. We have a gala to attend. You cannot just cut us off in the middle of the afternoon." "The bank is closed," I said softly, and I disconnected the line. I set the phone down just as Elias sent me a text message detailing their next move. In a desperate attempt to secure their social standing, my parents had driven directly to the Ashbourne Harbor Society. They marched into the grand lobby, demanding to speak with the event coordinator about their diamond benefactor status. The coordinator, holding a freshly printed seating chart, politely informed them that their central table had been reassigned. The escrow deposit backing their pledge was no longer valid, and the society had strict rules against extending credit. Even to legacy members, their names were physically erased from the board. Humiliated and seething with anger, Randall stormed out to the covered portico and handed his ticket to the valet. He demanded his vehicle immediately. The valet manager, however, did not signal for a driver. Instead, he stepped forward with a deeply apologetic but firm expression. "I am terribly sorry, Mr. Hathaway." The manager explained, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of the country club driveway. "Our automated garage liability scanner flagged your license plate when you arrived. Your comprehensive automotive insurance policy was canceled at noon today. Club regulations strictly prohibit our staff from operating any uninsured vehicles on the premises. You will have to walk down to the self-park lot to retrieve it yourself." For the very first time in a decade, my father had to walk 3 blocks in the humid afternoon heat, his expensive driving shoes scraping against the pavement. Completely stripped of his VIP privileges, he was forced to realize that the luxurious armor he wore was incredibly fragile, ready to shatter the exact second I stopped paying the premiums. They drove back to the Mount Pleasant estate in absolute, suffocating silence. When they pulled through the wrought iron gates, the visual reality of their situation finally hit them. The sprawling property was completely desolate. The driveway was empty. The premium landscaping crew, who usually spent their Thursday afternoons manicuring the massive hedge walls, had abandoned their tools in the dirt and vanished because their retainer had been pulled. Inside the house, the grand foyer was entirely dark. The elite deep cleaning team had simply not shown up. The high-end grocery delivery service had canceled their shipment of organic produce and imported meats. The vast, echoing house was rapidly decaying back into a standard, unmaintained building. All the services that made their life look grand were disappearing. My father completely lost his mind, fueled by a cocktail of blind rage and desperation. Randall left my mother in the silent house, got back into the uninsured luxury SUV, and drove aggressively to the downtown headquarters of Redcrest Infrastructure Recovery. He expected to march right through the double glass doors, ride the private elevator to the executive floor, and scream at my finance team until the money was turned back on. He expected the royal treatment. He did not even make it past the marble reception desk. The head of building security, a retired military police officer I had personally hired, stepped directly into my father's path. When Randall tried to push past him, citing his status as the father of the chief executive officer, the security chief simply crossed his massive arms. "Mr. Hathaway, your name has been permanently removed from the approved visitor registry," the guard stated, his voice booming across the busy corporate lobby for every employee to hear. "You are not an employee, you are not a vendor, and you do not have a scheduled appointment. If you do not vacate the premises immediately, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing." My father stood frozen in the center of the lobby, his face burning with a bright, violent shade of crimson. He looked around at the administrative assistants and junior project managers who were openly staring at him. He was not a respected gentleman advisor holding court. He was just an angry, sweaty man being thrown out of a building he had absolutely no right to enter. He walked back to his car, completely defeated. When Randall finally returned to the dark, silent house in Mount Pleasant, he found Celeste sitting at the massive granite kitchen island, She was holding a stack of unopened mail, her hands trembling slightly. He sat down heavily on the bar stool next to her. The heavy, oppressive silence of the empty estate pressed down on them. For the very first time since I handed them the keys to that house, they looked at each other with a profound, unadulterated sense of terror. The arrogant indignation was entirely gone. The illusion was broken. As they sat in the dark, surrounded by the rapidly fading ghosts of their stolen wealth, the horrifying realization finally washed over them. The ruthless, mechanical precision of their financial destruction was far too coordinated for a struggling company. Their bankrupt daughter had never been bankrupt at all. Naomi and Elias arrived at my secure downtown condominium on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was still strictly confined to my emerald velvet sofa. A heavy heating pad pressed gently against my healing abdomen. They did not bring flowers, pastries, or warm well wishes. They brought 3 massive, black leather binders filled to the brim with corporate destruction. The final forensic audit was officially complete, and the truth hidden beneath the spreadsheets was far more sinister than simple embezzlement. It was a calculated, multi-layered betrayal that compounded upon itself like a fatal poison. Naomi sat on the edge of the matching armchair and opened the first heavy binder. She mapped out the exact, horrifying anatomy of Magnolia Civic Relations. My mother had not simply skimmed money off the top of my company accounts to buy designer shoes. She had orchestrated a sophisticated money laundering operation. Celeste had actively recruited her weekly tennis partner, a woman named Victoria, to act as the registered corporate officer. Victoria would receive the massive charitable grants from Red Crest Infrastructure Recovery, take a quiet 15% cut for her silence, and funnel the remaining cash directly into a completely hidden offshore account controlled solely by my mother. To make this fraudulent structure entirely bulletproof, Naomi and I had to locate the single weak link in my mother's armor. That link was a former junior bookkeeper named Marcus. My mother had aggressively pushed Marcus out of his job exactly 14 months ago when he started asking entirely too many questions about the mismatched community outreach invoices. Naomi tracked him down to a small accounting firm in the suburbs. I authorized a secure phone call, offering Marcus the generous severance package he was previously denied, plus a full guarantee of legal immunity. In return, Marcus handed over a physical flash drive containing the original, unaltered ledgers and a chain of email directives from my mother. It was the undeniable, concrete proof that locked down any possible avenue of denial. The money was stolen, and it was stolen with clear intent. Elias stepped forward, his expression carved from absolute granite, and opened the second binder. He laid out the terrifying reality of the forged digital signature I had found lingering on my father's desktop computer. It was not just a simple, misguided personal loan to cover a gambling debt or a bad investment. Randall had used my outdated credential to personally guarantee a massive, high-risk mezzanine debt instrument directly attached to the Ashbourne Harbor Society Event Fund. He had essentially wagered the operating capital of my entire corporation against his own social standing. If the winter fundraising season fell short, or if the gala failed to generate the required revenue, Red Crest Infrastructure Recovery would be legally obligated to cover a deficit of over $800,000. My own father had positioned me to take a catastrophic legal and financial fall, risking the livelihoods of my 200 employees, just so he could maintain his VIP parking spot and his seat at the head table. The sheer audacity of the forgery was breathtaking, but the absolute darkest, dirtiest secret they kept was not financial. It was deeply, sickeningly personal. Elias reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a single, printed email thread. He slid the crisp white paper across the glass coffee table toward me. It was a chain of correspondence between my father, my mother, a prominent private wealth banker they frequently dined with, and a senior board member of the yacht club. The subject line read, Abigail's medical emergency and wealth management transition. The timestamp on the email was truly devastating. It was sent exactly 2 hours after I was wheeled into the emergency operating theater, while my life was literally hanging in the balance. In that email, my parents meticulously outlined a plan to stage a formal family intervention the moment I was discharged from the hospital. They intended to weaponize my physical collapse to fabricate a narrative of severe mental exhaustion. They were going to bring the banker and the board member directly into my hospital recovery room to act as independent witnesses. Their goal was to corner me while I was heavily medicated, vulnerable, and desperate for comfort, and strong-arm me into signing over full power of attorney. They referred to it in the email as a necessary transition of asset management for my own protection. It was a hostile corporate takeover wrapped entirely in the velvet guise of parental concern. They were planning to steal my autonomy, declare me mentally unfit, and seize absolute control of my empire, all while pretending to hold my hand. I stared at the printed words on the page until the black ink blurred together. The final, microscopic shred of hope I held for them died right there on my sofa. They had not just abandoned me, they had actively plotted to bury me alive. We take this directly to the district attorney right now, Naomi urged, her voice tight with a furious, protective anger. This is a felony conspiracy to commit wire fraud and extortion. They belong in handcuffs by the end of the day. No, I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm, hollow register. Abigail, you cannot let them walk away from this, Naomi argued, leaning forward. And they tried to destroy your sanity. I am not letting them walk away, I stated clearly, carefully shifting my weight on the cushions. But if we arrest them quietly in their living room on a Tuesday afternoon, they become instant martyrs. They will spin a beautiful, tragic story to the entire coastal district. They will tell everyone that their ruthless, emotionally unstable daughter framed them over a petty business dispute. They will play the victims. I refuse to give them the privilege of controlling the narrative. Elias leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. He recognized the cold calculation in my eyes. What do you want me to do? Abigail, give me the plan. Prepare 2 entirely separate legal dossiers, I instructed him, my mind operating with total clarity. The first file will be a comprehensive civil litigation package designed to immediately recover every single stolen asset, liquidate their safety nets, and permanently sever their legal ties to the Mount Pleasant estate. The second file will be the criminal fraud package, heavily loaded with the testimony from Marcus and the forged loan documents. A 2-pronged attack, Elias mused approvingly. Exactly, I confirmed. We keep the criminal charges in reserve. First, we hit them civilly and publicly. If they smear my name afterward or try to retaliate socially, we file the second package and let the courts finish it. They need to understand that their freedom depends on staying quiet. And where exactly do you plan to drop this bomb? Naomi asked, a slow smile finally breaking across her face. Because you are clearly building up to an audience. I want to hit them where it hurts the most, I said, I want to take everything from them on the exact stage they value more than my life. The perfect opportunity arrived exactly 3 days later. The building concierge brought up my weekly mail delivery. Resting at the very top of the stack was a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with heavy, intricate gold wax. It was an official invitation to the Ashbourne Harbor Society Winter Ball. According to the extensive society gossip columns Naomi had been closely monitoring, my parents were currently scrambling frantically behind the scenes. They were aggressively telling their elite peers that my sudden financial freeze was just a temporary misunderstanding caused by my post-surgical stress. To save their rapidly cracking social status, they were promising everyone that they would announce a monumental charitable donation at the winter ball. They were desperately setting the stage for their own glorious redemption. They had absolutely no idea that I was going to walk onto that exact same stage and turn their grand redemption into a spectacular, unforgettable public execution. The counterattack did not begin with a team of high-powered defense attorneys or aggressive legal injunctions. It began with a whisper campaign, meticulously engineered in the carpeted locker rooms of the country club and the private dining parlors of the historic district. My parents, entirely stripped of their financial lifeblood, fell back on the only currency they still possessed, their carefully cultivated social standing. Naomi brought me the intelligence gathered from her extensive network of high society clients. Randall and Celeste were actively canvassing Charleston, spinning a tragic, entirely fabricated narrative to anyone who would listen. They were telling their elite peers that I was suffering from a severe post-surgical psychological collapse. They painted a heartbreaking picture of a devoted mother and father struggling to manage a daughter who had become dangerously unbalanced after a medical trauma. According to their story, I had temporarily frozen the family accounts in a fit of paranoid, stress-induced delusion. They assured their panicked creditors, their country club board members, and their wealthy friends that this was merely a brief, unfortunate medical hiatus. They promised everyone that as soon as my hormones stabilized and my mental clarity returned, I would eagerly resume my financial responsibilities. They were buying themselves time, using my emergency surgery as a convenient shield to protect their crumbling facade. Simultaneously, the psychological warfare was being piped directly into my secure condominium. I had legally blocked their numbers from reaching my primary cellular device, but the system still allowed them to leave voicemails in an isolated digital inbox. On Wednesday afternoon, I sat on my velvet sofa and listened to the audio files out of sheer, morbid curiosity. There were 14 messages from my mother. The first few began with a soft, trembling voice, overflowing with weaponized maternal affection. Celeste would cry softly into the receiver, recounting highly sanitized memories from my childhood. She talked about taking me to the coastal boardwalk when I was 7 years old, about the expensive ballet shoes they bought for me when I was 12, weaving a heavy, suffocating blanket of guilt. But the mask of the heartbroken mother always slipped by the end of the recording. Within 3 minutes, the sobbing would abruptly stop, replaced by a sharp, demanding tone. She would transition seamlessly from reminiscing about my youth to bargaining over the utility bills, begging me to just authorize one single wire transfer so she could pay the private chef for the upcoming holiday mixer. She wanted to drag me back into the familiar, comfortable cycle of debt and forgiveness, while my mother played the weeping victim on the telephone. My father was thrashing violently in the financial shadows. Elias called me on Thursday morning, his usually calm voice tight with a rare, vibrating tension. Randall was actively attempting to secure predatory, short-term liquidity loans from a network of private equity brokers he had mingled with over the years. Because my father had no actual collateral to his name, he was attempting to leverage the fabricated narrative of my mental instability. He was quietly offering these brokers high-interest returns, promising them that the loans were backed by guaranteed upcoming corporate dividends from Redcrest infrastructure recovery. He was literally trying to pawn my company's future earnings while insisting I was too incapacitated to manage my own empire. Elias was forced to engage in a frantic, high-stakes game of legal defense. He spent 48 solid hours drafting and dispatching aggressive cease-and-desist orders to every private lender in the coastal district. Elias threatened them with immediate federal litigation if they dared to issue a single dollar to Randall Hathaway using my corporate identity as unauthorized collateral. We successfully blocked the bleeding, but the sheer desperation of my father's actions proved exactly how dangerous they remained. Sitting in the quiet safety of my living room, listening to the rain lash against the thick glass windows, a cold, undeniable realization settled over me. If I simply handed the fraud evidence over to the authorities and sued them in a quiet, closed-door civil courtroom, they would actually win the social war. They would stand before the judge looking like tragic victims. They would return to their country club friends and claim that I had ruthlessly framed them over a petty family disagreement. They would spend the rest of their lives dining out on the story of their cruel, ungrateful daughter. I could take their house and their cars, but if I left their reputation intact, they would simply find another host to leech off of. I picked up my phone and initiated a conference call with Naomi and Elias. "We are changing the strategy," I announced. "A private legal settlement gives them too much room to play the martyrs. They care too much about appearances. I want the truth to come out in the one room they value most, the Ashbourne Harbor Society Winter Ball." A heavy silence hung over the line for a moment before Naomi let out a short laugh. "A public reckoning. I support it. Tell me what you need me to build." "I need a presentation," I told her, my mind locking onto the logistics. "I want a digital slide deck. It needs to be incredibly clean, sharp, and entirely devoid of emotional commentary. I want side-by-side visual comparisons. Put the community outreach tax invoices directly next to the high-resolution photographs of my mother wearing the designer gowns she bought with that exact money. Map out the Magnolia Civic Relations Shell Company with big, bold arrows pointing directly to her private offshore accounts. I want the forged signature on my father's loan application magnified by 300% on the screen. It will be clean, precise, and impossible to argue with," Naomi promised, already typing. "I will have it loaded onto a secure encrypted drive by tomorrow evening." "Elias," I continued, pivoting my attention to the legal logistics, "the winter ball begins at exactly 8 o'clock on Saturday night. I need your logistics perfectly synchronized. I do not want the repossession agents showing up early and tipping them off. I need the representatives from Glassmere Holdings and the vehicle recovery team waiting in the dark, 2 blocks away from the venue. I will personally coordinate the recovery teams," Elias assured me, his tone radiating a dangerous professional satisfaction. "They will move in on your exact signal. By the time your parents walk out of those ballroom doors, they will not have a vehicle, they will not have a home, and they will be holding a stack of civil indictments thicker than a phone book." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of meticulous, cold preparation. I rested my body, conserved my physical energy, and mentally rehearsed the choreography of their ruin. On Saturday evening, the sun dipped below the historic Charleston skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the city. The ambient noise of the downtown traffic felt incredibly distant. The time for hiding in the shadows was officially over. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I was not wearing a heavy, glittering ball gown designed to attract the wealthy elite. I chose a minimalist, long-sleeved ivory dress tailored with severe, architectural lines. The fabric was heavy and uncompromising. Beneath the pristine silk, the fresh surgical scar bisecting my abdomen still throbbed with a dull, persistent heat. It was a physical reminder of the exact moment my family had left me to die. And I welcomed the pain. It kept my mind razor sharp. I applied a stark, minimalist layer of makeup, pulling my dark hair back into a tight, severe knot at the base of my neck. I looked at my own reflection. For 34 years, the woman looking back at me had been plagued by a desperate, trembling need to be loved by two people who were entirely incapable of the emotion. But tonight, the trembling was completely gone. My dark eyes were steady, entirely cold, and focused on absolute destruction. I picked up my evening clutch, secured the encrypted flash drive inside, and walked out the door to burn my family tree to the ground. The grand ballroom of the Ashbourne Harbor Society was a sea of glittering diamonds and imported silk. From my vantage point just outside the double mahogany doors, I watched my mother, Celeste, floating between the tables. She was playing the role of the undisputed queen of the evening, laughing brightly and touching the arms of influential board members. My father, Randall, stood near the ice sculpture, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, projecting the arrogant confidence of a man who still believed his counterfeit power was real. They were waiting for me. I knew they expected me to walk through those doors with my head bowed, completely broken by the financial freeze, ready to write a massive check just to save the sacred family reputation. I stepped into the ballroom exactly 45 minutes late. I did not slip in quietly. The heavy doors clicked shut behind me with a resounding thud that echoed over the string quartet. As I walked down the center aisle in my severe ivory dress, the ambient chatter in the room began to die. People turned to look. The silence was not born of admiration. It was born of an absolute, terrifying shift in the atmosphere. I was not radiating the desperate energy of a daughter seeking approval. I carried the calm certainty of someone who had stopped asking for permission. Up on the main stage, the master of ceremonies tapped his microphone, signaling the start of the primary fundraising announcements. He cleared his throat and began to introduce the highly anticipated Diamond Benefactor Pledge from the Hathaway family. I did not stop walking. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the stage, approached the podium, and smoothly took the microphone directly from his hand. The master of ceremonies blinked in confusion and stepped back. "There is no Hathaway family pledge tonight," I announced, my voice slicing through the dead silent ballroom like a scalpel. In fact, there has never been a Hathaway family pledge. For the past 10 years, every single dollar donated under that name, every gala underwritten, and every floral arrangement purchased was secretly siphoned from my corporate operating accounts. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. I saw my mother freeze in the center of the room, her champagne flute trembling. Randall's face turned a violent shade of crimson as he started pushing his way through the tables toward the front. I looked to the back of the room and gave Naomi a single, brief nod. The massive digital projection screen descended behind me. The ballroom lights dimmed. Naomi operated the presentation with ruthless efficiency. The first slide illuminated the dark room, displaying the registration documents for the Magnolia Civic Relations Shell Company, directly cross-referenced with my mother's offshore banking routing numbers. The screen flipped instantly to a side-by-side comparison of fraudulent community outreach tax invoices and the exact receipts for the designer gowns my mother was currently wearing. My mother did not build a charity, I stated plainly, looking directly into the horrified faces of her closest friends. She built an embezzlement ring to fund her own vanity. Randall finally reached the edge of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at me. Turn that screen off immediately. She is completely unwell. This is a medical episode. I am perfectly lucid, Randall, I countered, dropping the title of Father Forever. I signaled Naomi again. The screen flashed to a massive 300% magnification of the forged commercial bridge loan application, highlighting the outdated digital signature. My father was not satisfied with simply stealing my money. He attempted to leverage my entire infrastructure company to cover his own social debts by forging my legal signature. Then came the final slide, the one that left them no room to deny any of it. The screen filled with the email thread time-stamped exactly 2 hours after I had collapsed in the catering hallway. I read the words aloud to the silent room, detailing their meticulous plan to use my emergency surgery as an excuse to declare me mentally unfit and seize total control of my assets. You did not wait to see if I would survive the night, I said, staring dead into their eyes. You only cared about who would sign the checks when I was gone. Before Randall could scream another denial, Elias Wren stepped out from the side wing of the stage. He did not address my parents. He spoke directly to the club's board of directors seated at the front table. As lead counsel for Red Crest Infrastructure Recovery, I am officially notifying this society that the Hathaway Family Trust is permanently dissolved, Elias declared, his voice booming with legal authority. The Mount Pleasant residency is terminated as of this hour. The fraudulent debts will be aggressively prosecuted. And the pearl-white luxury vehicle currently parked in your valet loop is being repossessed by the bank right now. Celeste finally broke. She tried to deploy her signature weaponized tears, reaching out toward the women she had played tennis with for years, begging them to understand. But the socialite crowd actively recoiled. They pulled their silk dresses away, stepping backward as if my parents were covered in a highly contagious disease. The club president signaled the waitstaff, who walked over and silently removed the Hathaway nameplates from the benefactor table. I opened my evening clutch and pulled out the crumpled, water-stained $20 bill my mother had thrown at me outside the hospital. I walked to the edge of the stage, leaned over, and placed the flattened paper directly onto the table in front of them. You keep it, I said, my voice perfectly steady. Tonight, you will need it more than I do. The society security guards, large men in tailored suits, materialized on either side of my parents. They politely but firmly took Randall and Celeste by the arms and escorted them down the long, humiliating center aisle, entirely surrounded by the judging stares of the very people they had sold their souls to impress. As they were pushed out the heavy front doors and into the damp night air, they did not find their sleek vehicle waiting. Instead, they watched a heavy commercial tow truck hoisting their SUV into the air. Standing under the portico light was a representative from Glassmere Holdings, who stepped forward and handed my father a thick, bound stack of civil indictments that officially finalized their absolute ruin. 6 months later, my life looked entirely different. My surgical wounds were completely healed, leaving only a faint silver line. I had entirely restructured Red Crest infrastructure recovery, implementing ironclad financial firewalls that guaranteed no one would ever exploit my labor again. I successfully sold the massive Mount Pleasant estate, reclaiming a significant portion of my lost capital. With those recovered funds, I established a private, specialized medical grant. It was designed exclusively to provide private nursing, secure housing, and financial support for women navigating major post-operative recoveries without the safety net of a reliable family. As for Randall and Celeste, they quietly relocated to a cramped, two-bedroom apartment on the far edge of the county, entirely exiled from the glittering coastal society they worshipped. For the first time in their adult lives, they were forced to learn the excruciating, daily mathematics of survival, staring down the barrel of their own utility bills with the terrifying knowledge that there was absolutely no one standing behind them to pay the price. Thank you all so much for listening to this story today. Please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. I invite you to subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me further by hitting that hype button so the story in this video can be heard by even more people.